They wore tuxedos like armor, read scripts like poetry. At least, that's what the cameras wanted you to believe. But behind the curtain of Golden Age Hollywood, some of its most beloved stars couldn't read the very lines that made them legends. How did they learn their roles? How did they hide it? And what did it cost them? The truth is inked not in pages, but in silence. 1. John Wayne. John Wayne was the embodiment of American masculinity, gruff, articulate, a man's man. To millions, he was the cowboy who never flinched and the soldier who never blinked. But the truth behind the legend was far less polished. Wayne reportedly struggled to read scripts and preferred to have them read aloud to him. Biographer Scott Amon details in John Wayne, The Life and Legend, that Wayne's early years were marked by economic hardship and limited educational support. Though he attended USC on a football scholarship, he left before graduating, and many on set noticed he rarely glanced at a page. Instead of reading, Wayne relied on his uncanny auditory memory. Assistants or co-stars would read lines to him, which he'd absorb and deliver with trademark conviction. Directors like John Ford crafted shoots around his needs, minimizing cold readings. It wasn't dyslexia exactly, it was functional illiteracy, born from a lack of early literacy development. But Wayne never let that vulnerability show. He masked it behind bravado, improvisation, and a commanding voice that made every line sound like gospel. Even in later years, he resisted the teleprompter, trusting his memory over print. In a town where image was everything, Wayne rewrote the rules, one spoken line at a time. 2. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was the pretty boy with perfect cheekbones, an accent from the Bronx, and an irresistible charm. In films like Some Like It Hot, he dazzled with rapid-fire dialogue and comedic timing. But behind that polished exterior was a painful truth. Curtis was functionally illiterate well into his adult life. Born Bernard Schwartz to Hungarian immigrants, Tony grew up in poverty and chaos. He spoke primarily Hungarian until age 5 and was tossed between schools due to behavioral issues. In his autobiography, American Prince, Curtis admitted he couldn't read or write fluently until well into his 30s. He memorized lines phonetically and mimicked the cadence of his co-stars, often without grasping the deeper meaning of his words. During the height of his fame, Curtis relied on assistants and vocal coaches to help him prepare. Co-stars sometimes read scenes aloud, thinking he was simply absorbing the tone. In truth, he was silently decoding sounds he couldn't match to written symbols. It wasn't until after his career slowed down that Curtis took literacy seriously, eventually learning to read through adult education programs. His later artwork often reflected a sense of missed opportunities, a man chasing meaning in a language he once feared. For all his fame, Curtis's greatest performance may have been pretending he could read. 3. Jane Mansfield. Jane Mansfield was marketed as the smart blonde, a busty bombshell with a reported IQ of 163 and fluency in 5 languages. Publicity machines boasted about her intellect, even as she leaned into the sex symbol persona. But off-camera, there were whispers. Crew members noted that Jane often had difficulty with table reads and script analysis. The truth may lie in a deeper, more nuanced struggle. While Jane attended university and took theater courses, biographers like Martha Saxton in Jane Mansfield and the American 50s suggest much of her academic prowess was exaggerated by studios hungry for contrast against her sultry image. In reality, Mansfield may have dealt with undiagnosed dyslexia or a comprehension disorder, explaining why she reportedly needed lines read aloud during rehearsals. Rather than admit her challenges, Mansfield used charisma and memorization. She leaned into performance over precision, improvising lines when necessary and charming directors into tailoring scripts around her strengths. Her breathy delivery wasn't just style, it was sometimes a cover for uncertainty. Behind the glittering facade, Jane was a woman trying to navigate a script she could feel, but not fully read. And in an era that punished imperfections, her greatest role was pretending not to struggle. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn, the devil-may-care adventurer of Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood, seemed born to speak eloquent dialogue with flair. But behind the swashbuckling accent and piercing gaze, Flynn reportedly had trouble reading, particularly under pressure. Flynn's education in Tasmania and later in Sydney was spotty at best. In his memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, he openly admits to disdain for school, often skipping classes and faking illness. By the time he reached Hollywood, Flynn's literacy was functional, but shallow. He struggled with complex texts and often asked assistants to paraphrase scenes for him. Co-stars observed Flynn frequently avoiding table reads or asking for his lines in audio form. Directors noted his preference for learning through performance. He needed to hear and repeat, not read and dissect. Some attributed this to laziness. Others suspected a deeper literacy issue. To compensate, Flynn used improvisation, charm, and sheer physicality. His roles didn't demand intellectual depth, just presence. Still, the pressure to keep up in a literate industry weighed on him. Errol Flynn may have been ill-equipped to conquer the written word, but on screen he commanded every room like a man who had written the lines himself. 5. Judy Holiday. Judy Holiday was brilliant at playing not-so-brilliant characters. In Born Yesterday, she created a comedic masterpiece of ignorance. Off-screen, the irony was painful. Holiday struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia her entire life. Despite her photographic memory and razor-sharp wit, Holiday found reading exhausting. Biographer Gary Carey wrote in Judy Holiday, An Intimate Life Story, that she often avoided script discussions and requested more rehearsal time than others. She wasn't illiterate, but the effort required to decode written lines far exceeded that of her peers. To cope, Holiday memorized by ear. She'd have assistants or directors read to her, absorbing tone, rhythm, and emphasis. Then she'd rehearse obsessively, turning confusion into brilliance through repetition. Though her performances sparkled with intellect, Judy confided to friends that reading remained a lifelong battle. She feared being found out in a world where intelligence was judged by literacy. Her story is a poignant reminder. Even the most eloquent voices can rise from silent struggles. 6. Bert Lancaster. Bert Lancaster was the epitome of the self-made man, athletic, commanding, and unforgettable in films like Elmer Gantry and From Here to Eternity. On screen, he moved with a confident swagger and delivered lines with perfect clarity. But beneath that polished veneer was a painful truth. Lancaster came from a world where books weren't luxury, they were irrelevant. Born into poverty in East Harlem, Lancaster grew up in a rough neighborhood where literacy wasn't a priority. His early life was filled with physicality, not prose. According to Kate Buford's biography, Bert Lancaster, An American Life, he was functionally illiterate well into his early 20s. He joined the circus as an acrobat before finding his way into acting, learning the craft by watching and mimicking, not reading. On set, Lancaster preferred verbal rehearsal over script analysis. He often worked with dialogue coaches, not because he needed help with dialects, but because reading the script alone was too slow. Some co-stars noted that he would rehearse in whispers, repeating lines under his breath until they became second nature. But Lancaster never let his struggles define him. Later in life, he became an avid reader, finally embracing the written word after years of resistance. He even advocated for literacy programs in underprivileged communities, determined that others wouldn't suffer in silence the way he had. His was a voice that grew stronger the more he learned to read it for himself. 7. Mae West. Mae West didn't just perform on screen, she dominated it. With her sultry drawl and razor-sharp wit, she became one of the most iconic sex symbols and screenwriters of the 1930s. West was credited with writing many of her own scripts, but behind the typewriter was a secret. She rarely wrote anything herself. According to biographer Emily Wartis Leader in Becoming Mae West, Mae often dictated her lines and scripts to secretaries and ghostwriters. While she had a commanding understanding of character, rhythm, and timing, her ability to write or read at length was limited. Some attributed this to a learning disability, others to habit. West came from vaudeville, where improvisation reigned and script pages were rare. Studio archives suggest that Mae insisted on verbal script development and rarely participated in traditional table reads. She preferred to rehearse in private, with assistants reading aloud, allowing her to refine delivery through rhythm and feel rather than ink on a page. Despite the literacy gap, Mae West outwitted censors, redefined femininity, and built an empire. She turned verbal cunning into cinematic gold, proving you don't need to write the words to own them. She didn't just speak her lines, she owned the air around them. 8. Clark Gable. Clark Gable was Hollywood royalty. Dubbed the King, he delivered unforgettable performances in Gone with the Wind and It Happened One Night. His confident baritone and subtle charm made every line sing. But in private, Gable dreaded the one thing every actor was expected to master: reading the script. Born to a working-class family in Ohio, Gable's early education was erratic. Though he pursued acting with determination, he struggled with cold readings and often avoided written scripts altogether. According to Warren G. Harris's Clark Gable: A Biography, he developed a technique of memorizing lines through repetition, either whispered by a coach or learned during blocking rehearsals. Crew members reported that Gable often had someone on set quietly feed him lines before takes. He'd then deliver them with such natural poise, no one suspected he hadn't read them. His secret wasn't full illiteracy, but a profound discomfort with text, likely stemming from dyslexia or a deep insecurity about his reading skills. Despite the flaw, Gable thrived in a visual medium. He used charm, intuition, and sheer presence to make audiences believe he was every bit the man he portrayed. In a town obsessed with appearances, Clark Gable proved that reading hearts mattered more than reading lines. 9. Debbie Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds was the all-American girl, singing and dancing her way into hearts in Singin' in the Rain. Her cheerful voice and polished performances masked a reality few knew. Reynolds struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia throughout her life. Biographers like Ed Seekoff in On Sunset Boulevard note that Reynolds often required extra time with scripts. She wasn't a slow learner, she simply processed information differently. Words swam on the page, letters flipped, and comprehension lagged behind her boundless energy. To survive in the fast-paced studio system, Reynolds turned to audio. She would have scripts read aloud by coaches, assistants, or sometimes her mother, absorbing the material through sound and rhythm. Her musical background helped. She remembered lyrics and dialogue the way others remembered melodies. Despite her challenges, Reynolds built a decades-long career across film, television, and stage. She raised a family, wrote memoirs with help, and advocated for mental health awareness later in life. Behind the bright eyes and shimmering dresses was a woman who rewrote the rules of success without needing to rewrite the script. 10th, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was a rebel, a method actor, a genius, and by his own admission, a terrible reader. He revolutionized acting with a streetcar named Desire and On the Waterfront, bringing raw emotion to every performance. But few knew how little time he spent with the page. In his memoir, Songs My Mother Taught Me, Brando confessed that reading was a chore he avoided whenever possible. He claimed to have a poor memory and often needed cue cards hidden just off camera. On the set of The Godfather, director Francis Ford Coppola famously hid lines in drawers, lampshades, and even on actors' foreheads. Brando believed that reading dulled spontaneity. He wanted reactions, not recitations. But this philosophy may have also masked an early literacy issue. Teachers in his youth labeled him distracted and unfocused. Reading aloud was torture, and he often relied on listening over reading. His performances were electric, intimate, unpredictable. He didn't just act, he lived the role in the moment. And in that moment, words didn't need to be read. They needed to be felt. Marlon Brando proved that the most powerful scripts are written in instinct, not ink. 11. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson defined masculine beauty in post-war Hollywood. With his towering frame, cleft chin, and quiet charm, he made hearts flutter in films like Magnificent Obsession and Pillow Talk. He played doctors, generals, and dashing suitors, but privately, reading even a basic script could leave him paralyzed. Born Roy Harold Scherer, Jr., Hudson grew up in Illinois with little formal education. His biographer, Sarah Davidson, notes in Rock Hudson, His Story, that Hudson struggled in school, often failing reading assignments and avoiding literacy-heavy tasks. Rumors of undiagnosed dyslexia shadowed him into adulthood. On set, Hudson was known for his photographic memory, but only when lines were fed to him verbally. He often asked assistants to read through scenes while he mimicked tone and cadence. Some directors quietly adapted scripts for audio rehearsal instead of traditional read-throughs. Despite this, Hudson delivered nuanced performances. He used instinct, not analysis, to guide his roles. His vulnerability, real and hidden, bled into every romantic scene, making his characters more authentic than any script ever could. His true strength wasn't in reading the lines, it was in feeling them. 12th, Zaza Gabbor. Zaza Gabbor was more than a Hungarian beauty queen. She was a personality, a phenomenon, a walking aphorism. She sparkled in talk shows and films, dripping with diamonds and tossing off quips like confetti. But behind the confidence and catchphrases, Zaza had a complex relationship with the written word. English was her third language, and according to her memoir, One Lifetime Is Not Enough, she often relied on translators or assistants to help her understand scripts. Some studio insiders claimed she never fully learned to read English fluently, depending instead on line readers and vocal memorization. She camouflaged her struggle with charm. Directors knew not to give her long monologues. She worked best in short bursts. Co-stars said she would often recite lines back after hearing them once or twice, performing them with such flair that no one cared about precision. In an industry that worshipped Polish, Gabbor dazzled with pure improvisation. She didn't need to read the story. She was the story. Zaza proved that literacy isn't the only way to leave a mark on Hollywood. 13. George Raft. George Raft didn't just play gangsters, he was one, at least in background and attitude. Raised in Hell's Kitchen, Raft ran with real-life mobsters before he found his way into Hollywood. But while he looked the part of the sharp-suited tough guy, scripts were his private enemy. Raft's education barely extended past elementary school. He spent his youth dancing in clubs and running numbers on the street. In George Raft, The Man Who Would Be Bogart, biographer Louis Yablonsky describes Raft as a man who could read people better than paper. That wasn't metaphor. Raft was functionally illiterate for much of his career. On set, Raft leaned on memory and mimicry. He was known to ask directors to rehearse verbally instead of through script breakdowns. Some say he had entire scenes dictated to him, which he then internalized through repetition. Despite limited literacy, Raft held his own alongside legends. His performances were steeped in realism, drawn from lived experience rather than scripted emotion. In a town full of pretenders, Raft's illiteracy didn't make him less authentic. It made him more so. 14. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the clean-cut, golden-haired dreamboat of the 1950s, an idol to millions of teenagers and a fixture on magazine covers. But off-screen, Hunter was painfully aware of a secret that embarrassed him deeply. He could barely read. Born Arthur Gellion, he struggled in school from the beginning. In his autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential, he reveals a childhood full of academic frustration. Letters didn't make sense, and reading comprehension was a nightmare. Teachers wrote him off as slow or distracted. In reality, he was fighting undiagnosed dyslexia. Hunter confessed that he often learned his lines phonetically. He'd hear them once or twice and repeat them, relying on a strong ear and sharp intuition. He feared being exposed, especially in Hollywood's cutthroat casting world. Despite his challenges, Hunter built a career through perseverance and charm. He never let his illiteracy define him, though it haunted. Built a career through perseverance and charm. He never let his illiteracy define him, though it haunted him well into adulthood. In the bright glare of flashbulbs, Tab Hunter shined. But behind the smiles was a boy who never quite made peace with the page. 15. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was a child star turned Hollywood lifer. He lit up screens in the Andy Hardy series and danced beside Judy Garland in MGM musicals. Quick-witted, energetic, and endlessly expressive, Rooney had the kind of talent that defied convention, and sometimes basic literacy. Rooney himself admitted in interviews that he struggled to read. As detailed in his memoir, Life is Too Short, he spent his formative years on sound stages, not in classrooms. He often received scripts the night before shooting, then stayed up until dawn with coaches who fed him lines. Crew members said Rooney had an astonishing memory. He could hear a full scene once and recite it back with the right tone, emotion, and timing. His improvisational genius often masked his inability to decode written scripts. Despite being hailed as a wunderkind, Rooney's literacy lagged far behind his peers. But in a town that valued performance above all, he made his own rules. For Rooney, reading didn't shape his world. Acting did. And somehow, it was enough. 16. Mamie Van Doren. Mamie Van Doren was one of the original bad girls of Hollywood, a platinum blonde siren who oozed rebellion in films like Untamed Youth and Girls Town. Modeled after Monroe and Mansfield, she radiated sex appeal and attitude. But beneath the pout and curves was a secret struggle that Mamie rarely discussed. She had difficulty reading, even as her fame soared. Raised in a conservative working-class household in South Dakota, Mamie's early schooling was inconsistent. In her autobiography, Playing the Field, she admits that reading never came easily. Teachers labeled her as distracted, and she eventually dropped out of high school. Though she later completed a GED, the trauma of being The dumb blonde stuck. On movie sets, Mamie often relied on her husband or assistant to help her parse scripts. She would rehearse lines aloud with co-stars or memorize them phonetically. Directors who worked with her began minimizing dialogue and maximizing physical presence, crafting roles that required more attitude than articulation. Yet Mamie was no fool. She mastered Hollywood's illusion machine, building a persona that masked her academic insecurities. She later became an advocate for adult education, encouraging women to reclaim their self-worth, no matter how late in life. Her story proves that literacy isn't the only measure of intelligence or legacy. 17. Hedi Lamar. To the world, Hedi Lamar was a paradox, a stunning beauty, and an inventor whose work laid the foundation for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth technology. She was dubbed the most beautiful woman in the world, yet her mind was often more remarkable than her face. But there's another side to Hedi's brilliance, one obscured by language barriers and early educational gaps. Born in Austria, Lamar fled Europe in the 1930s as fascism rose. She spoke German fluently, but struggled with English upon arriving in Hollywood. According to Ruth Barton's biography, Hedi Lamar, the most beautiful woman in film, Hedi had difficulty reading and understanding English language scripts during her early years in America. Her accent masked a deeper issue. She wasn't just translating, she was learning to read a new language as an adult, on the fly. To compensate, Hedi memorized lines phonetically. She often requested scripts early, had them read aloud to her, or marked them with symbols only she understood. Despite her genius in scientific thought, traditional reading comprehension in English remained a lifelong challenge. Still, she stunned audiences with her poise and precision. She designed secret communication systems by night and memorized scripts by day. Her brain never stopped working. It simply found other ways to adapt. Hedi Lamar's brilliance defied the limitations of language. Her mind was too vast to be constrained by paper. These stars lived in a world of scripts and spotlights, but many faced their biggest challenge in silence, one page at a time. Illiteracy didn't stop their success. It simply rewrote the path. Which revelation moved you most? Let us know in the comments. And don't miss our next episode, The Plastic Surgery Secrets Before Filters Existed. Subscribe now.